Good evening, everybody. This is Cinnamon Moore. Welcome back to Circle of the Moon. So, in the last episode, we got to the top of the chapel tower and pressed a switch that blew up a bunch of Iron Maidens, which, you have to admit, is pretty metal. If a bit unsatisfying from a mechanical perspective, I would much rather have a mobility upgrade. But actually, one interesting thing about this game is that because the upgrade path is so skewed, it makes it a little difficult in the later parts of the game for them to give you satisfying upgrades. When you start out with first giving them the dash and then double jump right off the bat, at that point you've already gotten most of the things that make a game fun to move around with. So it was kind of hard for them to invent new stuff. Like, at this point, the one upgrade left, I would say, that really makes you feel like moving around feels different would be just the ability to fly, what's normally called the Griffin Wing or the Gravity Jump. But they can't give that to you now. I mean, that's an endgame power-up. So instead we have all these weird parts of the middle of the game where they give you powers like pushing boxes around, or just, let's blow up a few statues that were standing in the way. And it's interesting, this desire to make the beginning of the game more interesting can sometimes make the middle sag more. You would think, well, why don't they just come up with more good ideas? But it really is sometimes a case of just, there's a certain fixed number of things you can come up with to make a game more interesting, and if you use too many of them too soon, it can make the later parts of the game less interesting. One thing that is definitely going to make the Chapel Tower return more interesting is they have replaced most of the Flame Knights with, or is it called Flame Armor? With these electricity-based ones, who are more difficult, and also their attacks much more annoying to try to avoid. This is probably the quickest that an enemy has ever been replaced with another type of enemy in the same area. Oh no, do I leave the cross behind here? Oh, I'm an idiot, I do. Oh look, the gold armor. Could have used that 30 minutes ago. Thunder armors, yeah. So these are just kind of tricky guys. Their attack can hit you just with the sword, obviously, but then it also sends out this little electricity ball that will follow you all over the place, and they stick around for a remarkably long period of time. One other thing that, by the way, makes the return down the chapel kind of dissatisfying is we didn't get a mobility upgrade here. So it's not like there's any new areas we can explore now that we've beaten the boss. We just have to get down to the bottom. The one nice thing about this is that it's short. Like, it's very hard to get up the tower, but getting down is much easier. They sort of streamline it for you. See, as you can see, we just dropped down almost the entirety of a room in 10 seconds. It's kind of like falling down the ice caves in Spelunky. Sorry that I keep checking the map here. I was being a little paranoid, like I was certain there was something I was missing. But nope, you really do just have to get out of the tower now. Now, we won't be getting that until the end of the next area, when we will develop the ability to push boxes. Hooray. By the way, I have to say, in addition to the stained glass, one thing I like about this area, and now that I look at it again, the save rooms too, is the carving. There's some really fun little carvings in the stonework of this game that make it feel a little more realistic and help enhance that sense that it's three-dimensional, since the carvings are in the foreground and your character's moving around in kind of the middle ground. And then, of course, you have the room in the background. I love with these stained glass windows, especially in this room in particular, how they're so tiny that it's almost impossible to make out what they actually show. Like, I think there's supposed to be some saints, maybe a biblical scene at the bottom there, and the top is clearly some sort of palace, but it almost looks like a Chinese palace, because it's so compressed. And as for the border, I couldn't tell you what that is. Maybe a garland of flowers or something? We get more gold armor, which would be really useful if this game had shops, but it doesn't, so it's not. So I was once again checking here to sort of regain my bearings. The area we'll be getting to is right in the middle of the map underneath that part of the audience room that we found earlier. And you can see there's two different ways to get in there from here. But there's actually only one way that we can get into it. The other way is the exit, not the entrance. And in Circle of the Moon, that makes a big difference. It's less open-ended than a lot of the other Metroidvanias. Finally, I can destroy axe armors in one hit. Which is nice. Unfortunately, the next time I'll be passing through this area, the axe armors won't be there anymore, and they'll be replaced with a new enemy that I can't beat in one hit. So I'll have to enjoy this while I can. So yeah, this is one of the areas we can now go in. You'll notice that the Iron Maiden is destroyed, like it was up in the Chapel Tower. Unfortunately, this is the exit. You can see there's a wooden box there. No obstacle more impenetrable in all of existence. And I suddenly realize what's happened, and all I can do is shake my fist in anger. Yeah, so as you can see here, the gargoyles have completely replaced the gremlins. So this replacement of enemies is already happening. I think the game tries to frame it so that what happens in the Chapel Tower is sort of a world-changing event. You know, you encounter Hugh, he's a complete douche, and then when you defeat a Dramelech, it's like some enemies start to replace other enemies, and the whole castle is starting to slowly change. It's like what happens when you defeat Rom in Bloodborne. To a much lesser extent, of course. So we're heading back to the warp room here, because I have realized that the entrance that I saw earlier is in fact the one and only entrance to this next area. I take the opportunity to save. And now we get the Golem card. From the Electric Skeleton. This is a card I don't use very often. It also kind of changes your whip in the same way as the Salamander card. The Golem has the attribute of Earth, so obviously Salamander, we have fire, Golem is Earth, the Mandragora is, plants. Each one of these is a different elemental combination, which goes along with the planet association of the various gods and goddesses. I really like the combination of Golem and Mercury. It's this really cool stretchy whip that gives you a lot of range. And of course with Venus, this is a stat boost. I was trying to figure out what stat it increased, and as it turns out, it is defense. This is basically the equivalent of the walk armor in other games. When you have this on, your defense will increase relative to how much of the map you've explored, which I think for me right now is about 50%. Not a bad defense boost, actually. I'm going to be using that. Oh, bronze armor. Don't need that. Could have used that thousands of minutes ago. I think I got a little confused here and thought I was going into the warp room. I'm getting senile in my old age. Here we go. So luckily not much has changed in the Eternal Corridor. So, it's sort of a pleasant nostalgic revisit. And I'm going to use this new Golem Whip to put the hurt on these enemies. If I don't get killed first. Same thing happens, but at least this time I'm able to defeat it while I am frozen, and we get some more meat, which is nice. Having some actual healing is going to be very beneficial in the next area, which is, it's kind of a tough area. So you'll notice I'm getting sort of a slight attack increase from this, but not much. Mainly the benefit is just the increased range. Alright, and here we go into probably my most hated area in this game, the Underground Gallery. You'll see soon why, but for now, just rest assured, there is nothing fun about this area. Except for the music. As is typical for this game, the music is fantastic. This is Aquarius, which is a very well-known musical track from Castlevania 3 that's been reused in a lot of Castlevania games, but I think this was the first one to reuse it. Like I said, whoever compiled this soundtrack just had amazing taste for previous tracks from the Castlevania series and put them all together. So even though I like some of the original tracks in this game, like Awake, probably the best ones in the game are the ones like this that are, rearrangements. Took me a while to realize what was going on here. You need to ride that platform to the end and then slide. So this area is a little bit puzzly, more so than other areas in the game. But that kind of quickly goes away, and instead it becomes more about dealing with really irritating enemies. The next area past this is going to be even more puzzly. Yeah, I'm not going after that MP thing. I have bigger fish to fry. I have more MP than I know what to do with already. So, here's kind of an annoying thing. When you first enter this place, there are 2 rooms that are blocked off by wooden boxes, which we're going to be able to push after defeating the boss in this area. So, it's really a tease. Then we have this big open room. It's got a couple harpies. I like the harpies in this game. They're portrayed sort of more as monsters here. They look less like just a woman with wings, and more like some kind of freakish monstrosity, which is cool. They're also pretty tough compared to harpies in other games. I guess because they're coming in pretty late here. This is like the 3rd or 4th to last area in the whole game, actually. More knives we don't need. Technically, we don't need holy water either. The axe would be more useful against the boss. However, holy water is kind of useful against some of the enemies here, so I'll probably hold on to it until I can get to the boss. I would have been doing best of all if I just kept the cross, but I'm too stupid for that. So there is a way to get up there, but not with our current abilities. We need to get a new DSS card in order to be able to see that. And use it in kind of a clever way, so what I'm talking about is the one that lets you turn enemies to stone. Normally, you would think to only use that with the brain floats, because those are the ones that allow you to create a series of steps. But in this area, you can actually make a platform out of some enemies that move around the whole room. You just need to be able to place them correctly. So we find our first save room here, out of 2, and deal with the Spectres, which is the 3rd version of what was originally the spirits and the ectoplasms. These Spectres are obnoxious. You'd think, well, they'd be exactly the same as the other ones, right? But actually, the Spectres are made to spawn in such a way in these really tall rooms that they almost always manage to knock you out of your upward trajectory. And that just makes them so irritating. I hate these Spectres. Just one thing of many that makes me hate this area. Another one is that these king moths, along with a lot of other enemies in this area, inflict poison. Poison is one of the most common things that will happen to you in this area. In fact, you get poisoned almost about as much as you get hit in this level. The other thing I don't like about it, and this is a flaw that's common to a lot of parts of Circle of the Moon, is that most of this area is just series of long hallways. Like, it's just hallway after hallway. The difficulty is mostly in just dealing with all these enemies, some of which are damage sponges and some of which are just obnoxious punks. The one thing I suppose that is kind of good about this area is that you don't technically have to go through a lot of it. A lot of these optional, staircases, hallways, lead to upgrades, so you don't technically need them. And yet, as I've mentioned before, you do need upgrades in this game, unless you're much better at it than I am. So really what this kind of turns into is this, battle of attrition, where you go and get an upgrade, you lose a lot of your health getting it, then you go all the way back up to the save room, back down, and you explore another hallway. I just don't find going back and forth through the same hallways all that interesting. I'd rather have a level that's more oriented towards traversing it in an interesting way, going up and down, finding different ways to do things. Just going back and forth along a hallway is very annoying to me. The Eternal Corridor, I was able to deal with it because that room is literally just like 3 hallways, and then you go to a new area that has different stuff. But this area is basically all hallways and then a few larger rooms. Another problem that I have with it, and I realize this is partly personal preference, the aesthetic of this area I do not find interesting at all. It's like a cross between a basement and an old tomb. And it's just full of these bugs and, flying creatures. And I don't find it enticing at all. So even in the larger rooms where, you'd think there'd be a little bit of variety from these hallways, the aesthetic is so boring, I just don't find much to latch onto here mentally. Another problem with this area, which we'll soon see, although it's not, I shouldn't say soon, which isn't for a while yet, is the boss. This area has the most infuriating boss in this game. One of the most infuriating I've ever dealt with in a video game. So stay tuned for that. I can see why they designed this area the way that they did. The concept has potential, but it seems like it was designed to be frustrating. There are areas like this in a lot of Castlevania games. A lot of the underground catacomb in Symphony of the Night is this way, as well as a few of the areas in the Inverted Castle, which are basically just tests of, your patience. In Aria of Sorrow, the last area is kind of like this, the World of Chaos, or whatever it's called. Not a big fan of that. One nice thing here, we get the Cockatrice card. So a Cockatrice is another name for a basilisk, and it's something that can turn things to stone. So now we finally have gotten this upgrade that allows us to petrify enemies. One annoying thing, which again makes it a lot like the Ice Beam in Super Metroid, is that this will only freeze enemies when they are one hit away from death. So if it's a really low-level enemy, then just hitting it once will make it turn to stone. If it's a really, if it has a lot of health, like the Praying Mantises, you have to hit them like 5 times before they'll freeze. I'm also showing here some of the other things you can do with the Cockatrice. If you use it with Jupiter, you turn into stone and become totally invulnerable to damage at the cost of moving at half a mile an hour everywhere you go. Trust me, it's not worth it. I'm not even sure if you can attack when you have that on. Either way, it's not much fun. But actually, now that we have this, now that we have, funnily enough, a soul or a card of something that is like a chicken, we are going to turn chicken and we are leaving this horrible place. I'm going to go and get some upgrades using this new ability. But before we head out of this horrible place, I am going to use my new DSS setup to get up to that upgrade that we couldn't get earlier. So I show you how it works here. We do need the Harpy to go over to where we are, which kind of means that we need to be on the same screen as it for at least a little while so that it can identify us and get over to where we are. I think the thing can't actually follow you to I think the thing can't follow you unless you are on the same screen as it. So it'll just stay there forever. It'll still be stored in memory, but for some reason it won't move unless you're there. Another thing I forgot is it needs to be close to death, so the first hit won't do it. So I go to all that trouble to position it perfectly, only for that to happen. The other thing, the annoying thing about petrification, is it does not last very long. Oh, also, depending on what sprite you freeze the enemy in, it is kind of difficult to tell where you can jump on it, where the hitbox is. I am trying to kite this enemy up to where I want it, but the trouble is that it follows you pretty much where you are. You kind of have to wait for the Harpy to fly above you, which it does sometimes, and then try to get it from there. And of course, when it knocks you back, that's horrible, because then it puts you in a different position and it follows you to where you are. There we go. About time. So there's one upgrade we can get here, an MP Max, but there's also another. Which we're going to need to use the wall jump for. There we go. And again, I just fall off it because who can say what the freaking hitbox is there? And up here we have a Lizard Man. A pretty uncommon type of enemy. He's the only one in this area, I think. They may show up a little more in later areas of the game. But I'm kind of proud of the way I dealt with this one. Clever little whip swing, and then I just finish him off. And we're falling down this pit again. I'm getting really used to the sight of this pit. No, so we're going back down to the first part of the game where we had those brain floats in the tower. Right here in the catacombs, right at the beginning. It's now a lot easier to deal with these enemies, even the flea men. But they have to get close, they have to approach. And now I'm going to show you how to get up on these brain floats. This is a little harder than it might look at first, because these enemies are constantly moving around. It's a little see, right there. It's a little difficult to tell when you're going to get hit by them. Which, of course, if you do get hit by them, you will almost certainly fall down the whole way. And you also have to make sure they're positioned properly. The thing about these brain floats is they don't all travel the full length of the screen. Some of them have a sort of smaller, range that they'll go back and forth between. And you have to know that. That can trip you up when you're trying to coordinate how they're moving in order to be able to jump from one to the other. Oh, I also decided here to check out the other entrance to the underground waterway. The thing about this is, in the other direction we couldn't go anywhere because there was an impediment. Here, the water is poisonous. We will actually eventually get an ability that will clear the water. However, until that happens, you will basically die going in there. There are speedruns that have involved going to that area. You have to move very carefully and very cleverly in order to get that. So I wouldn't recommend it for a novice. And since I am a novice, I wouldn't recommend it for me, so I won't be doing it. I don't know what this area is for. Maybe there's a secret room in the wall there somewhere. Or maybe this is just a break from the brain float, tower. Hard to say. Yeah, it's so funny how this would not be nearly as difficult, except that these brain floats can spit out these orbs. I am certain that they knew full well how irritating their ability to do that makes this, and they didn't care. It is kind of fun to just freeze normal enemies and see what they look like, with their sprite completely frozen. And gray. But you'll notice, it's been like 5 seconds since I froze the guy, and he's already unfreezing. I think even in Super Metroid, enemies stay frozen for longer than that. Then again, Super Metroid isn't technically a horror game, whereas this is. So yeah, look at this. Like, you are not allowed to wait for these guys at all. You have to start your ascent in a position where you can get back and forth among them. One thing that might trip you up a little bit, and that helps you once you realize it, is that you don't actually need to freeze every one and, climb them one at a time. They are spaced close enough together that you can technically skip every alternate one. But for that, you have to make sure that you're not actually going to run into them by skipping them, because they will damage you and knock you away. Like almost every other Mook enemy in this game, they can send you across the room just by hitting you for 1 damage, as we see here with the Skeleton Bomber. I was certain that there would be some kind of secret room up here, but I don't think there is. Nope. Instead, we have to go over to the other side, where there is a little gap. Yeah, that actually gave me a little mini heart attack, because I thought I was going to fall the whole way and then I'd somehow made a mistake. But no, there's our HP up. That's what we came here for. There's also one we can get in the Chapel Tower. Actually, 2 we can get in the Chapel Tower, using our new Stone Whip ability. It may seem to you a little odd that I did just completely take a break from the underground gallery to go here. But when you see this next boss, you will know why I needed to do this. It's not a want, it's a need. Bit of a tricky wall jump here. Wow, I was actually really lucky to run into that when I did. And very unlucky to do that. Shouldn't jinx myself. It is kind of interesting that in some of the cases of the brain float, when you get to the last one, you're out of the woods, and you don't have to worry about it anymore. But for others, you have more challenges to go through. And you can lose progress to the extent of going all the way back. Alright. So we got those 2 new upgrades, and now we're back in the underground gallery. It's interesting that the room extends below here, because there's nothing to find in this smaller part. I think the reason why it's there is that in order for platforms to respawn, you have to be able to completely leave behind the screen that they're in. They have to be off-screen to respawn. So, if they didn't give you that little area, and if the floor just stopped where the next door is, then if you got rid of the platform and you still wanted to go up, you'd have to totally leave the room in order to do that. Instead, you can just fall to the bottom, and then all the platforms will respawn, and you can go to the top again. Kind of an interesting solution to a bit of a clumsy problem. It would have been easier if they just had the platforms respawn after a certain amount of time. But I suppose they preferred the idea of them respawning instantly when you can't see them. So we're now heading to the second level of hallways. And again, it's still hallways. We have an intelligence ring, which I do not care about. I'm not using intelligence. I despise intelligence. Luck all the way. And this area. So yeah, I mentioned earlier a lot of the enemies in here do poison attacks. I do have a lot of antidotes, but you can get poisoned like 4 or 5 times in this room. So it's actually a pretty smart idea to, if you do get poisoned, don't heal it until you're near the end. That way you won't have to worry about these bees. And here we have the man-eaters. Fairly common enemy that's been in Castlevania since, I believe, before Symphony of the Night. One of my favorites, actually. I've always liked the man-eaters. They kind of remind me of, you know, Audrey 2, like evil Venus flytraps. Oh, that was lucky. That flame saved me from poison there, but that one didn't. Yeah, I hate the killer bees. They're really obnoxious, and they're really quick. Like, they're basically just there to make sure that you always jump and attack in exactly the same pattern. If you ever mess it up even once, you'll get killed. Not killed, just attacked. And here we have poison armors, which if anything are worse than the bees, because at least the bees will die in one hit, whereas these poison armors have a lot of health. They also have a very unusual attack, which is pretty hard to understand and dodge. So, when they swing forward, the sword will hurt you, but the little cloud they send out actually won't hit you until it travels past you, and then becomes solid, at which point then it will start moving towards you and sort of closing the gap like a pincer movement between you and the knight. And then it can poison you and cause damage, but not until then. So it's confusing. Like, if you just hold your position, then it makes that a lot easier, but that's a hard thing to remember to do. You know, something's heading right towards you. You don't think of an attack as being able to phase through you without doing damage and then turning solid. That was stupid. I used an antidote and then immediately I got poisoned again. Yeah, that room in particular I hate. I cannot stand that room. And here's another terrible room. So this is almost exactly the same as the last room, except rather than having the evil hands, they just have more man-eaters. I do like the man-eaters as enemies, but it's not enough to make up for the rest of this area. This is just a terrible area. And honestly, you know, I know I'm being very subjective here, but I do think objectively this is actually a pretty bad area. I'm so demoralized by it that I barely even remember to go back and get the holy water. Not that holy water is any good against the next boss, so I'm going to have to find another sub-weapon. Preferably the cross, but I don't know if there is a cross in this area or how to get it. These statues are kind of cool. First interesting thing I've noticed in this area. You know, I think I've mentioned before that when you're just watching yourself play the game back instead of playing it, you have the privilege of sort of noticing things that you weren't able to notice before. But one thing about that is that in that case, sometimes you realize just how little there is to notice. Oh god, I hate that specter. Even with my little protective thing here, like, this is still so frustrating. In this room in particular, these specters spawn in such a way that it's just evil. Like, the game knows exactly where you want to go, and that is where they spawn. Oh boy, so having dealt with all of that, that's all for today. Good night, everybody. See you next time.